You know, the Performance Tour show wouldn't be possible without the support from our wonderful sponsors. So thank you to Tricentis and QA Consultants. I am on a quest. I want to find out how to make software and hardware perform at their peak. I want to know how to make applications faster, better, and more efficient. And while I'm at it, I want to have a little fun. Don't think I can do it? Just watch me. I'm Scott Moore, and this is the Performance Tour. Hey everyone, Scott Moore. I'm back on the road again on the Performance Tour. This time we're talking about observability. I know no better person to talk to about this than Rebecca Kleiner of Splunk. This is our main focus. And guess what? She's also in Florida now too. So I decided I'm going across the state to the East Coast. Coral Springs, Florida is where Rock and Roll Ribs is at. And you know I love barbecue. This restaurant is owned or co-owned by the drummer of Iron Maiden, Nico McBrain. And we're going to try out some ribs today and talk observability. Okay, Rebecca, welcome to the Performance Tour. You are in the famous Perfmobile. How does it feel?
Awesome, thanks for having me.
Tell me about yourself. Introduce yourself to our audience.
So I am Rebecca Kleiner. I go by Becky though. I'm from New Hampshire. I grew up in New Hampshire and just recently moved to Florida. It's been a long time a plan for me to end up here, and so I'm psyched I finally got here. I'm all about the ocean and the sun and the beach.
Tell me about your history as a performance tester and performance engineer. How long have you been doing this?
So 21 years. I started my career in genetics actually, and kind of 4 years in college for genetics, and then I kind of became a lab rat doing the same thing over and over in a windowless room, and I was like, what did I do? And I went into Linux system administration until the year 2000, and I got a call from this .com company, and promising millions with the stock options, right? So
yeah, everybody had that.
Everybody had that call, but it was a fun ride, wasn't it?
It was.
It gives you hope you could do it again. But anyways, they needed a performance engineer, and I said, what's that? I had no idea what it was, and they were like, well, you know about the operating systems. I'm like, totally. And they said, well, we need somebody that understands how applications interact with operating systems and scalability, performance. And I had a great mentor there as well, and started using QA load as the first load testing tool, and getting a Java application to scale to meet target workloads so it could be deployed to customer sites, and never looked back. I've been in performance engineering ever since then. So
you are now doing solely observability. That's your focus now,
yes.
Right? So how did you make the transition from performance engineer to someone who just focuses on observability?
It was the easiest, peasiest transition you could ever imagine, because it was easy, because I was always running performance tests from the front end, okay? And I was cobbling together how to find, monitoring tools to find the bottleneck. And then when I couldn't cobble it together, if the company didn't have, Wiley at the time, or they didn't have a budget for monitoring, I was using the poor man's APM. And by that, I mean, I was creating realistic load tests and then creating a script that only hit the web server, because back then it was monoliths, right? And then only hit the app server and only hit the database. And so I would use this single script to say, okay, what degrades first? But it was always, it was, you're in the dark, and your theories, and you're creating theories, you're disproving theories, you're exaggerating bottlenecks. And so when I started using an APM for the first time, it was like somebody turned the lights on. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, what have I been doing for 10 years?
So let's go back 10 years. Everybody's using an APM tool, if they're smart, to monitor as many things in every tier across the stack. Let's say they do a great job. That's a hard thing to do, number one. Number two, you get all this data, and not everybody knows what to do with it because you get all these data points. But so what I have read about observability is we're not just taking data monitoring points and saying, oh, CPUs are out of whack or whatever, but you've got to kind of still put that together in your head. Observability says, let's pull all that data together and give you something that says, here's how your system is actually doing right now. Here's the health of your system based on all those metrics and points, not just the individual graphs and dashboards, because those get so I guess confusing for some people, or it's just a lot of work to set it up and then you don't have any actionable data. I think observability is supposed to get you to actionable data quicker by sharing maybe a different way of looking at your system. Am I going off?
Kind of, yeah, almost. For, so observability is a unified platform for full stack monitoring, basically. So like you were talking about, we would take like a front end and then an APM and maybe a database monitor, and then we'd have to correlate all that data and information and look at kind of swivel chair, look at all these different monitors and dashboards, and the bells and whistles are going off everywhere. Observability really is full stack in a single platform. But not only is it full stack, it's about the context and the metadata. So what I mean by that is, let's start from the front end. Users hitting web pages, going to different microservices, the database, etc., the infrastructure, the cloud infrastructure that's running on. All of that is brought into a visual context, so that if I have a degradation at an application level, I can see whether in the same pane of glass, okay, and I know single pane of glass is overused and was misused for many years,
yes.
But I can see whether was the degradation due to a resource saturation, or was it in the code, was the time spent in the code. And of course, if the underlying infrastructure is saturated, the code's going to be slower, right? Mm-hmm. But if the infrastructure or all the soft limitations, everything's flying through, but you're going slow in the code. What I'm trying to say is, you can see all of this in observability platform, and saves you a ton of time. It reduces the time to know that there's a problem, to understand where it's coming from, and to resolve it.
So the three pillars of observability are metrics, logs, and traces. So how do we put all those together and come up with this platform? What are they telling us, and how do we utilize them to find problems?
Right, so the telemetry data that's coming in to the observability platforms, metrics are going to tell you there is a problem. They're going to indicate something's not right, whether it be the throughput, response time, error rate. It's not going to tell you the root cause, but it's absolutely going to alert you to let you know something isn't performing right, isn't healthy, or isn't responding, etc. And then traces comes from distributed tracing, and how that works is, you've got a trace ID with the more modern platforms. Trace ID is starting from the front end, from the web pages, and that context of that trace is kept all the way through. And what traces does in a UI of an observability platform tells you where the problem is, where exactly, maybe it's hitting 100 microservices. That's the microservice that's an error, or this is a microservice that's taking a long time, or this is the database call. And so traces tell you where. And a lot of times you can solve the issue with traces, but we all know we need the last mile a ton of time. We need the logs. And it's interesting because some observability platforms didn't have logs at first. The one that I'm with right now started with logs. So that last mile, that verbose log output typically is a smoking gun. And the metrics will tell you, when's a problem, traces will tell you where, and then you've got that trace ID in the logs too. Bam. That's the full story. So Open Telemetry is a community of, if you were a proprietary company and you were a customer of that company, you'd have to wait for new features or to bug fixes or all that kind of stuff. And it's not to say you don't have to wait with Open Telemetry, but you've got thousands of people contributing to it every day. And so you're kind of, and also it's a unified and a standard way of, as more and more technologies are supported, cool technologies are released, the compatibility is, keeps up, and it's a way of future-proofing the collection of your telemetry. What you're paying for with observability everyone's going to use OpenTelemetry eventually, right? Let's just say that what you're paying for is the perspective on the data,
The visualization.
right? And they're not just like custom dashboards, but like I want a workflow where in 3 clicks I can figure out in a Kubernetes cluster if I've got a noisy neighbor, causing degradation on this other application. It's the perspective of the data that you're buying or you're leasing, right? Because it's a SaaS platform of your telemetry data, and you're getting your data in using OpenTelemetry now performing.
Awesome. So based upon my conversation with Rebecca, she says if I want to learn about OpenTelemetry in more depth, then I need to talk to Steve Flanders, and that's who I'm going to bring in now, unfortunately virtually, but welcome to the Performance Tour, Steve.
Thanks so much for having me.
So why don't you introduce yourself to the Performance Tour audience?
Sure. So my name is Steve Flanders. I'm a director of engineering at Splunk, and I'm responsible for what we call observability GDI, or getting data in. I've been in the monitoring and observability space for over a decade, coming into Splunk through the Omnition acquisition that happened about 2.5 years ago. Omnition was known for its distributed tracing solution, as well as its work in the OpenTelemetry community. Prior to that, the Open Census community. Before Omnition, I was at VMware working in the logging space. So very familiar with kind of hands-on experience here of trying to solve complex software problems and keep systems highly available and performant.
So you're definitely the person that I want to talk to about this. So when I dive into observability and look at the 3 pillars of metrics, log, and traces, can you speak specifically to OpenTelemetry and the relationship that it has to these 3 pillars?
Yeah, absolutely. So for all those different pillars, that's basically telemetry data. And the question is, well, how do you collect that data? Turns out it's rather challenging. So if we look at trace data, for example, you need to instrument your application, and your application may be written in 1 or more languages. How do you instrument that application to emit the trace data that you need? Or in the case of metrics, of course, there are application metrics, but there's also host-based metrics. How are you going to collect this in the wide range of variety of deployment models that you have? Maybe on-prem, in cloud providers, maybe using a bunch of different technologies like Kubernetes. Same applies for logs. So what is OpenTelemetry trying to do? It's trying to offer an open source and vendor agnostic way to instrument and collect this data and then send it to 1 or more different backends. In fact, that's where it draws the line. OpenTelemetry does not provide a backend. Instead, it supports a variety of different open source and commercial backends that you can plug into to send your telemetry data. The idea here is simple. If you instrument once with OpenTelemetry, you then have choice as to where your data goes and the type of data that you're sending out of your environment, thus being completely vendor agnostic and giving you things like data portability.
Now, I'm an audience member who already has an APM, a traditional APM platform or product. So how do I benefit from this? Do I just completely switch over to something? Can I add this to what I have? Where do I start seeing the value in this? Is it different, better, or can I have both?
So it comes down to where are you going from a business perspective? If you are thinking about switching APM vendors, for example, and you're using a proprietary APM instrumentation data collection mechanism, that will be a heavy lift. So that's where starting to move over to OpenTelemetry can be beneficial. It's not an all or nothing thing though. So a lot of people today will start with the OpenTelemetry collector. This is basically an agent that can be deployed in a variety of different ways into your environment. And what they'll typically do is they'll route their existing telemetry data through the collector. This way, they're not actually touching their applications. Most users or companies today are comfortable rolling out agents and maintaining agents. So the collector is basically an agent that supports all the different telemetry signals that you're used to. And so that's the easiest way to get started. You could also selectively roll this out. So maybe you're in a polyglot where you have, Java and Node.js. Maybe you start rolling your Java services off of the proprietary instrumentation that you're using and onto OpenTelemetry. That can be a viable solution if you're using the same context propagation format in the case of traces. Luckily, there are open standards there, so there are definitely ways to do this. So we've seen people that have either taken an iterative approach to start with just the collector or maybe choose a language. But the benefit is once you start fully moving on to OpenTelemetry, you get this data portability. It's a one-time lift, and then you can switch to any vendor that you want, or use 2 vendors at the same time, or 2 open source projects, whatever you need for your business requirements. It basically becomes a configuration thing. Flexibility and choice is really what OpenTelemetry is striving to get you to, so you don't have to do this heavy lift ever again. But it could be like you use OpenTelemetry for traces, maybe you use Prometheus for metrics, maybe you have a different solution for logs. You can pick which pieces are applicable to you or what parts you want to move to OpenTelemetry. It's definitely not an all or nothing type solution.
Thank you so much for being with us, Steve.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's go back and finish the interview that we did with Rebecca at the restaurant, and we'll finish that up now. So Rebecca, we were talking about observability and observability platforms, and you're now working with Splunk.
Yep.
So how is Splunk different as a platform from others?
So what's different now is that Splunk is a full suite observability platform, full fidelity. They have the architecture, they can scale, so no sampling, and they are basically one of the highest cardinality platforms out there. I get to act as a sales engineer, I get to interact with the product managers, and now I get to do a little bit of marketing too.
Awesome.
So,
that's great.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? Where do we take observability from here?
Where do we take it? Well, first of all, the writing's on the wall. It's going to be OpenTelemetry. It's going to dominate as far as getting the data in. And then the future is all about the perspective on the data. And so, there's plenty of platforms out there doing all different type of usage and licensing modeling and stuff like that. But it's basically democratizing that data, making sure it's available to everybody, and the future is basically full of visibility, I guess. I think that just as the days were where performance engineering was a requirement before you release a new application or release a new build or a feature into the wild, into production, you had to performance test it. Now, if you have a new technology, you have a new platform using a cloud service, that has to be observable. You'll be able to measure it, monitor it, and ask questions of that data. So I don't think anything that's I think the only thing that's gonna be is a requirement now for observability. And Gartner had APM as a magic quadrant. Maybe there'll be a magic quadrant called observability in the future. That would be cool. And we all know the people with the most modern platforms, and again, the perspectives of the data.
Right. Well, there you have it. This is great, and thank you very much for being on the Performance Tour, Rebecca. So, we've learned a lot about observability in this episode and taken a deep dive into OpenTelemetry. And I gotta say, I got some inspiration from Rock and Roll Ribs, and I thought, what if I had chosen a different profession than performance engineering? What if I chose to be a rock and roll metal guy? James Pulley, you suck, man. I'm just saying, you suck sometimes. No, I'm just kidding.